My name is Lucy Collins, 28, and I've been living with my boyfriend Edward, 32, for 4 months, though we've been together for 2 years. At first, everything felt easy. I loved his quiet humor, the way he made coffee exactly how I liked it, and the comfortable routine we'd built. Our small two-bedroom apartment in the city had become a home, or at least it felt like one, until recently. It started subtly. Edward's coworker, Clara, began helping him with late projects. At first, I thought nothing of it. She was competent, professional, great at presentations, design work, whatever Edward needed. I even offered to make coffee when they worked late one night. But then, the small things started to add up. Texts that arrived after 11, excuses about client emergencies, and then rides home that always seemed to end at 2 a.m. The first time it happened, I didn't say anything. I told myself I was imagining things. Edward had mentioned his car was in the shop, so a ride from a coworker wasn't unusual. But the third time in 3 weeks, I watched through the blinds as Clara's headlights hit our driveway. I saw them laughing together in the car. Not work laughter, easy, private, intimate laughter. My chest tightened. When he walked in, I asked carefully, trying to mask the suspicion that had been growing like a storm cloud in my chest. "Edward, why are you getting home at 2 a.m. with Clara again?" He looked at me like I'd just accused him of treason. "Lucy, she's a coworker. We're working. You're being paranoid." I froze. His words were calm, almost casual, but the undercurrent was sharp. Blame me for noticing. Gaslighting, as I'd later realize. I wanted to argue, but I didn't. I simply said, "You're probably right. I am being jealous." He blinked at me. That's all. Just blinked. And that was enough. I wanted to scream that I wasn't imagining anything, but I swallowed it, for now. That night, I lay awake, listening to the hum of the city outside our bedroom window. The quiet apartment felt strange, almost suffocating. I replayed the last 3 weeks in my head. The giggling phone calls, the late-night rides, the way Edward seemed defensive whenever I even hinted at discomfort. I was crazy, they would say. But was I really? By morning, the apartment felt different. I got up earlier than usual, made my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and thought about the space we shared. Our bedroom, once warm and neutral, now felt like a silent witness to something I couldn't yet name. I had to take action, even if it was small. Nothing drastic, just small boundaries. Our shared space was supposed to be ours, but it felt invaded. Quietly, I started moving some of my things. My books, my personal toiletries, my jewelry box. I organized them in the guest room, just to give myself a sense of control. When Edward came down later, I could see the surprise on his face. "Why are there boxes in the guest room?" "Oh, those are yours," I said casually, hoping my tone didn't betray the anxiety curling in my stomach. "I thought you'd be more comfortable having your things in a separate space." His eyes narrowed. "Lucy, what are you doing?" I lifted my hands, palms up, just rearranging a little. "Everything's fine." His face went through an expression that was almost disbelief. "Everything's fine," he echoed. "This is insane. You can't just move my stuff." I took a sip of my coffee, the steam warming me in the quiet tension. "Actually, Edward, I can. This is our home, yes, but your constant late-night rides with Clara and the way you dismiss my concerns, I need boundaries. I can't sleep feeling like I'm competing with a coworker for your attention." He laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was sharp, dismissive. "Boundaries? Lucy, you're being petty. This is emotional abuse, moving my stuff to another room?" I held his gaze, steady, unblinking. "Maybe. Or maybe it's self-preservation. You tell me. You keep dismissing my feelings, calling me jealous and controlling. What am I supposed to do?" He shook his head, muttering something about paranoid and overreacting, and went upstairs to shower. I watched the door close behind him, the sound of water echoing softly through the apartment. My heart was a storm, and I felt both guilty and justified. The guest room had never felt so empowering. My books neatly stacked, my toiletries lined up, my jewelry sparkling in its box. For a moment, it felt like my space. I could breathe here, at least. That morning, Edward didn't say much. I kept my coffee warm, sat at the table, and observed him as he moved through our kitchen, completely unaware of how deeply this storm was brewing in me. The pattern was unmistakable now. Late nights, secretive phone calls, laughter shared in the dark of the city streets. My discomfort was valid, and yet I was the villain in my own story. The quiet gaslighting had begun, and I knew this was only the beginning. As I finished my coffee, staring out at the city, waking beneath the soft glow of dawn, I whispered to myself, maybe I am too jealous, or maybe something is wrong. And just like that, the balance in our home had shifted. What was once safe, comfortable, and familiar now had a shadow stretching across it. A shadow named Clara. The next few nights, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the apartment, every distant honk outside made me tense. I kept replaying the moments in my head. Edward laughing with Clara, brushing off my questions, the way he shifted blame onto me. Something inside me was fraying. The part that trusted completely, the part that thought love was enough to make everything okay. By the fourth late-night incident, I knew I had to act. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with boundaries I could control. That night, after Edward had gone to the shower, I moved quietly through the apartment. I didn't want to be seen as petty or irrational. I just wanted to reclaim a little space for myself. The master bedroom had always been ours, though mostly it felt like his. I began moving my personal items, my nightstand books, my jewelry, even my laptop, into the guest room. I made the bed there, fluffed the pillows, laid out fresh towels. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival in my own home. When Edward came downstairs later, wrapped in a towel, he froze. His eyes scanned the room, then the hallway, then the guest room. "Lucy, what's going on?" His voice was cautious but sharp. I sipped my tea, keeping my expression calm. "I thought it would be better if we rearranged a little. You've been working late, and, well, I needed some space too." His mouth opened, then closed. "Space? Lucy, you moved my stuff?" "Yes, your things are all neatly arranged in the guest room. I thought you'd like it." The incredulity on his face was almost comical. "You can't just do that. This is our home." I leaned back in my chair, choosing my words carefully. "Edward, our home, or your late-night adventures with Clara? Because every time I raise a concern, I'm being told I'm controlling. I'm not controlling. I'm noticing patterns. I'm noticing your behavior, and I need to feel safe here. This is the only way I know how." For a moment, there was silence. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant city noise filling the apartment. I could see the internal struggle in his eyes. Confusion, frustration, disbelief. "You're being dramatic," he finally muttered. I smiled faintly, though it was more bitter than anything. "Perhaps. Or maybe I'm finally standing up for myself. Every time you dismiss my feelings, you're teaching me that my voice doesn't matter in this relationship. That's not love, Edward, that's manipulation." He shook his head, pacing the kitchen. "Manipulation? Lucy, you're turning everything into a fight. Clara is a coworker. She helps me with work. You're jealous and controlling, always." I took a deep breath. I had rehearsed this in my head for days. Fine, maybe I am jealous, but isn't it strange that I feel jealous over someone who comes into our apartment at 2 a.m., 3 times in 3 weeks? Isn't it strange that every time I ask, you make me the problem? That's not me. That's you refusing to acknowledge my concerns. He stopped, staring at me like I had grown a second head. You're serious?" "Completely," I said. "If noticing your behavior with Clara makes me controlling, then I'd rather sleep in the guest room than pretend nothing is wrong." He laughed, a short, incredulous bark, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sleep in the guest room? Lucy, this is emotional abuse. Moving my things to another room, giving yourself space. It's absurd." I didn't flinch. Or maybe it's practical. Maybe it's self-preservation. You keep telling me I'm insecure. Well, maybe I am, but maybe I'm also right. Maybe this is exactly why I haven't shared my feelings sooner. Because they are always turned back on me, like I'm the problem. He opened his mouth to reply, then closed it. The tension between us was thick, almost tangible. I could feel it in the walls, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. I realized somewhere deep down that the balance in our home had shifted irrevocably. "I'm done pretending this is fine," I said softly. "I need boundaries. I need respect. And if you can't provide that, I need space to protect myself." He stood there, frozen, eyes darting between the guest room, the kitchen, and me. He finally muttered something about paranoid and went upstairs to shower. I stayed at the table, watching the steam rise from my tea, feeling a mixture of guilt and relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of empowerment. My apartment, my sanctuary, was still mine to protect, even if my heart felt bruised. That weekend, I stayed in the guest room. Edward was distant, not because he acknowledged my feelings, but because he knew he couldn't manipulate me without consequence anymore. I watched him move through our space, aware of every glance, every gesture, every sigh. Late Saturday night, I heard the car pull into the driveway. My stomach twisted. It was Clara, again. At this point, the pattern was unmistakable. I didn't even need to see her laugh with Edward through the blinds. My heart sank as I realized that my boundaries were not stopping her intrusion. They were just drawing the line where I could stand without being gaslit. I knew what I had to do next. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but for myself, for my dignity, for the right to feel safe in my own home. Because if I didn't, I feared I'd lose not just my apartment, but my sense of self, and maybe, one day, even the relationship I thought I cherished. By Monday evening, the pattern was undeniable. Clara's car in the driveway, Edward walking in late, trying to shrug off my questions. The apartment, once our shared sanctuary, had become a silent battlefield. I waited in the living room, heart pounding, as the clock crept past 2 a.m. When the headlights finally hit the blinds, I saw them. Edward and Clara, laughing together like the world belonged only to them. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and yet I felt a strange clarity. I wasn't imagining this. I knew something was wrong. When they walked in, I didn't scream. I didn't immediately confront them. I let them feel the weight of the space around them. The apartment had shifted, my guest room arrangement, the moved books, the reorganized closets. They could feel it. This wasn't subtle. This was a boundary. "Lucy, we were just working," Edward said, his voice a mixture of defensiveness and exhaustion. I looked at him steadily, my jaw tight. "At 2 a.m., Edward? Working? Really?" Clara laughed nervously, glancing at him. "It's just project stuff, Lucy. Nothing personal." I took a deep breath. "You keep saying that, but every time I raise a concern, I'm gaslit. You call me jealous, controlling, insecure. But what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling, is real. And I'm not going to pretend it isn't anymore." Edward's eyes darted to Clara, then back to me. "Lucy, this is ridiculous. She's a coworker. We're doing a presentation, which could have been done in the office, which could have been done during the day, which doesn't require her to be here at 2 a.m., laughing and whispering in our living room. So don't tell me I'm dramatic." The tension thickened. Clara's laughter faltered. Edward's jaw tightened. I could see the small cracks in their calm, the first hints of vulnerability under the arrogance. I stepped closer, keeping my voice firm. "You two work so well together. That's fine. But this is my home, Edward. And you've been turning my legitimate concerns into my flaws for weeks. I'm done pretending that's acceptable." Clara looked at him, then at me, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should—" "No," I interrupted. "You're leaving. Edward, I need you to see what it feels like to be dismissed, belittled, ignored. You're welcome to stay in the guest room if that makes it easier for you. But Clara, your time here is over. I won't have a coworker in my living room at this hour again." Edward's lips pressed into a thin line. He opened his mouth, then shut it. "Lucy, you can't just—" "Yes, I can. Because my space, my feelings, my boundaries, they matter. You keep choosing Clara over addressing me, over acknowledging my reality. That ends tonight." Clara gathered her papers, muttering something about needing to get back to the office. Edward followed her to the door, silent. I felt a momentary satisfaction as the apartment returned to its quiet hum. My heart, though still heavy, felt lighter. That night, alone in the guest room, I thought about everything. The laughter, the late nights, the constant gaslighting. I realized I had given up pieces of myself for this relationship. My voice, my trust, my peace of mind. And now, I wasn't willing to sacrifice anymore. The next morning, Edward tried to speak, to apologize, to justify. I let him talk, but I didn't respond. My silence was deliberate, a mirror of the disregard I had felt for weeks. Eventually, he understood. Not immediately, not fully, but the shift was there. The apartment had changed. So had I. I realized that taking a stand wasn't about winning. It was about protecting my dignity, reclaiming my space, and refusing to be gaslit into questioning my reality. That week, I cleared the rest of my belongings in the guest room, setting boundaries even more firmly. No more casual dismissals, no more late-night rides with coworkers in my driveway, no more pretending that my instincts were wrong. Edward watched, uneasy, finally beginning to grasp the consequences of his choices. Clara was gone. My apartment was mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the quiet satisfaction of self-preservation. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Trust, once fractured, doesn't heal overnight, and I was ready to see just how far I would go to protect myself from lies, manipulation, and the people who refused to respect the life we were supposed to share. By midweek, the apartment had a tense quiet that felt almost sacred. Clara was gone, Edward was subdued, and I had moved fully into the guest room, not because I wanted to leave, but because I refused to be manipulated in my own home. Edward tried. He tried to apologize, to explain, to charm his way back into my forgiveness. But I had learned a hard truth. When someone dismisses your reality repeatedly, when they gaslight you into questioning your own perception, words alone cannot fix it. Actions must follow. I sat him down one evening after work, the apartment dimly lit by the soft glow of the living room lamp. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the man I loved, facing the consequences of his own choices. "Edward," I began, voice calm but firm, "I need you to understand something. This isn't about jealousy, and it isn't about me being controlling. This is about respect, honesty, and boundaries. You've chosen multiple times to dismiss my feelings, to gaslight me, and to put someone else into our space at all hours. That ends tonight." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I let the silence hang, heavy and uncomfortable, a mirror of the tension he had forced me to endure. "You don't get to ignore my concerns and pretend nothing happened," I continued. "Clara isn't a threat because she's a coworker. She's a threat because you let her become one. And every time I spoke up, I was told I was the problem. That's manipulation, Edward. That's emotional betrayal." His eyes darted toward the guest room door, the room that had become my sanctuary. He swallowed hard. "Lucy, I didn't think—" "Stop. Don't try to justify. Don't twist it into my fault. You can acknowledge my feelings or walk away, but you cannot continue to ignore them." By now he was silent. I could see the regret, the confusion, the first real flicker of fear that the comfort of our routine, our shared home, might be gone. And in that silence, I realized just how much power I had ceded by staying quiet for so long. Later that day, I called Edward's sister, Nicole, to update her. She had always been supportive, and now, more than ever, I needed someone to witness what had been happening. "Nicole," I said, voice steady, "I moved my things to the guest room because I can't be gaslit anymore. Edward has been dismissing me, calling me controlling, while allowing Clara to come into our home at all hours. This is not okay." There was a pause on the line. Then, softly, Nicole said, "Lucy, you're right. That's awful. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. He needs to see this." Her words strengthened me. I felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about taking control of my life, my home, and my emotional well-being. That evening, Edward came home with a heavy, almost defeated look. Clara was no longer part of the equation, but the damage lingered. I could see it in his posture, the tension in his jaw, the way he avoided my eyes. I didn't soften. "Edward," I said, voice measured, "you've seen the consequences of dismissing my feelings. I've set boundaries. Clara is gone, and yet trust has been broken. If you want to repair this, it's going to take more than words. It's going to take respect, honesty, and consistency, and if you can't provide that, I will continue to protect myself, because I deserve that." He nodded silently. For the first time, there were no excuses, no deflections, just acknowledgement. Over the next few days, Edward began to realize what his choices had cost him. Not just the late-night rides, not just the laughter shared in secret, but my trust. He could apologize, he could explain, he could beg, but the weight of emotional betrayal had been set, and I was no longer willing to carry it silently. When Clara called him at work, asking for updates on their project, I saw the pang in his eyes, but I also saw the clarity in mine. I had regained my space, my voice, and my dignity. No one, no coworker, no manipulative partner would compromise that again. By the weekend, the apartment felt calm, almost healing. I still stayed in the guest room when tension felt too close, but I began to feel the power of self-preservation. My books were lined on the shelves, my jewelry glimmered in the soft light, and my laptop sat ready, undisturbed. I had drawn the line, and the consequences had followed. Clara's influence evaporated, Edward faced the reality of his actions, and I finally felt unburdened. For the first time in weeks, I whispered to myself as I lay down at night, I am not crazy, I am not jealous, I am right, and I will protect what is mine. The storm had passed, for now, but I knew that vigilance, boundaries, and clarity would remain my closest allies, because once someone shows you who they are through actions, words are no longer enough. The weeks that followed were quiet, but it wasn't peace born from ignorance. It was peace born from clarity. Clara no longer appeared at our apartment, and Edward moved through our space with a newfound, albeit tentative, awareness of the boundaries I had drawn. I spent more time in the guest room than I had intended at first, but it became my sanctuary. The books on my nightstand, the neatly folded clothes, the framed photographs of memories I valued. All of it reminded me that I had a life outside of his dismissals and manipulations. I wasn't just reclaiming physical space, I was reclaiming myself. One afternoon, I received a call from Derek, Clara's coworker, who had previously tried to stay in my orbit, unaware of the consequences. He hesitated, then muttered something about being suspended pending investigation at work. I listened, silent, feeling neither satisfaction nor vindictiveness. The consequences were simply part of the natural outcome of choices. Edward sat across from me that evening, an unspoken tension lingering between us. He finally spoke, voice low and sincere. Lucy, I see it now. I shouldn't have dismissed you. I hurt you. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Yes, you did, and I won't forget it. You can try to earn back trust, but it will take time and actions, not just words. He swallowed, nodding slowly. There was no argument, no gaslighting, no attempt to turn the blame onto me. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in weeks. In the following days, I began to feel the weight of the emotional labor lift from my shoulders. I realized how much I had tolerated silently, how much I had excused, simply because I loved him. But love without respect, without acknowledgement, is not enough to sustain a relationship. I reached out to my closest friends, shared the story of what had transpired, and allowed myself to feel vulnerable without fear of judgment. They listened, offered support, and reminded me that my instincts had been right all along. Edward and I began to navigate a new dynamic, one grounded in honesty, respect, and clear boundaries. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences, tentative steps toward rebuilding trust, and moments when the past threatened to intrude. But for the first time, I felt that I had a voice in my own life, one that would not be silenced or dismissed. I also learned an important lesson about intuition. The quiet alarm bells, the tiny inconsistencies, the uneasy feeling in my stomach, those were not signs of weakness or paranoia. They were signals, urging me to pay attention, to act, and to protect myself. Looking back, the experience with Clara and the late-night rides was painful, but it was transformative. It taught me that boundaries are not just lines drawn for others, they are declarations of self-worth. It taught me that emotional manipulation can erode love if left unchecked, and that reclaiming your life sometimes requires decisive, uncomfortable action. As I stood by the window one morning, sunlight streaming through the blinds, I realized something crucial. Life is messy, relationships are complicated, and betrayal can come in many forms. But through it all, the one person I could rely on to protect my peace was me. The apartment was quiet, the city alive outside. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth seep in, and whispered to myself, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I am whole, I am strong, I am enough. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.